I feel like I'm not really vibing with this. I'm kind of like overwhelmed with this book, raising the bar for what I'm going to be expecting from romance novels. Hey, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to episode 2 in the Bingo Board vlog series. If you missed episode 1, I will have it linked down below, but this is a new video series that I've started on my channel for the year of 2026. So this bingo board was actually made by my sister, but the prompts on the bingo board were all submitted by friends on Patreon. So in the first episode of this vlog series, I went through the top line and got a bingo with the top line, and so now we're going to be focused on this second line. There are 5 different prompts on this second line, so we're going to be going through one by one and trying to figure out which books I'm going to read for this video. The very first prompt on this line is to read a book that's been translated, and this is one that I did have a few different options for, but at the top of my list I was thinking about reading one of these. This one is Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and this is a book that has been on my TBR for so many years now, and this one was originally written in Japanese and translated into English, but then I also just recently got this book called The Midnight Shift, and this one, as you can see from the blurb on the top, says it's a best-selling Korean vampire novel. I was really torn over which book I wanted to read for this vlog, but I decided to go with Before the Coffee Gets Cold. It's been on my TBR for such a long time that it would be really nice to finally get around to this one. The second prompt on the bingo board is to read a book that has a scary cover. One that I decided to go with is actually this new horror book that's called Come Knocking, and this is from the same author as Fantastic Land. I actually saw this book when I was at my public library recently, and I was like, oh my god, like this cover is so scary to me. I'm really freaked out by the idea of people wearing masks like this where you can't really identify anything about their face, and I thought this would be a really great one to read in this reading vlog because this book came out at the end of last year actually, and I've seen nobody talking about it, and I'm actually so excited for this because it sounds like it has a very similar premise to Fantastic Land in the sense that we're following an investigative journalist, and there's kind of a similar situation where like there's this huge massacre that happens. It's an interactive theater experience that goes wrong and over 50 people die, and so this story is all told through interviews of all of the people who were there that night and trying to get to the bottom of like what really happened. Oh, it sounds like it's gonna be right up my alley, so I can't wait to read this. The next prompt on the board is to read a book that matches your favorite mochi nut. This is one that I really love because if you don't know what mochi nut is, it's basically like my favorite donut shop, and what I love about mochi nut is that every single week they have 6 new rotating flavors, so there's always something new to try. But if I had to pick my top favorite flavor of a mochi nut that I've ever tried, it would be this one that's called like ube. It's this purple frosting and it has these fruity pebbles on it, which adds like the perfect crunch. Oh my god, I love this one. And so when I was trying to figure out what book to read for this prompt, I was not only looking at books that had purple on the cover, but I was also looking for books that had purple with a mix of like other colors because of the pop of the fruity pebbles. And I actually realized that I had 2 different books on my Kindle as ARCs that could work for this prompt because I do have an ARC copy of The Open Era and I have an ARC copy of Served Him Right. And as you can see with both of these book covers, they both have a decent amount of purple and then like a pop of another color on the cover. Served Him Right is a new thriller that I've been so curious about, but I decided to go with The Open Era to read in this video because I am so excited for this queer sports romance. You have no idea, especially because this one is getting recommended for fans of Challengers, and like hello, Challengers is like one of my favorite movies of all time, and this one is going to be publishing in the month of June, so I thought now would be a really good time to read this one. And then the next prompt on the bingo board is to read a memoir, and I really love and appreciate this prompt because I've been wanting to read more nonfiction this year and I just haven't been doing it, so I'm really glad that this prompt is finally going to push me to read this book that's called Who I Always Was. And this one is a memoir that I've had my eyes on for a while by this author Teresa O'Cocken. This one says it's a gripping and deeply honest memoir and essays. This debut collection sets out to answer a universal question: why am I like this? And then the 5th and final prompt for this video, oh my gosh, this is a fun one because it says close your eyes and scroll your Goodreads TBR list for 5 seconds and read the book that you land on. Okay, hello, I am here to try and figure out what we're going to be reading for this prompt. As you can see on my Goodreads page here, I have 471 books that are on my want to read shelf, and with this shelf it does have the ability to show up to 100 books per page, so that's what I did so that we have a good amount to scroll through here. And I decided to go like smack dab in the middle, so I'm on page 3 out of all 5 pages because I think some of the ones that are on page 5 are like releases that aren't even out yet. But then page 3, this one has a lot of books that have been on my TBR for quite some time. So I thought this would be a really good place to try and find a book to read. And I mean, just scrolling through, you know, like these 100 books that are on this list, like I have so many that I'm really excited to read on this list. Okay, so I'm gonna close my eyes. We're gonna count down from 5. I'm gonna try to scroll around on this page. Hopefully I don't lose my spot where these books actually are. Okay, so we're gonna do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We Could Be So Good by Cat Sebastian. This is exciting because We Could Be So Good is now one of my most anticipated books after how much I just loved the book that I read from Cat Sebastian. I just finished reading Starshipped. Okay, even the synopsis that says Casey McQuiston meets the 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo, like hello, that's one of my top favorite books of all time. This book has been on my TBR for a while now. I'm so excited to read this. Oh my gosh, I'll have to see if my library has it available, but if not, I might just go ahead and buy it just because I really loved the last book that I read from this author. So as you can see from that clip, I ended up landing on We Could Be So Good, which is like best case scenario because after how much I loved Starshipped, I've been dying to read more from this author. So I decided to go ahead and place an order for that book because I already know that I'm gonna love it, right? So yeah, those are the 5 books that I'm gonna be reading in today's reading vlog. Let's get to it. Hello, I wanted to check in with the first update for this vlog because I have finished my first book, and that was Who I Always Was. You know, I started this one last night when I went on my walk, and I was listening to this one mostly on audio, and then this morning I had a bunch of different errands that I had to run, and you know, because it's a Friday morning, Costco was an absolute nightmare. It was so crowded, but it was actually really nice because now it's only 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I already finished listening to this one on audio. It was actually really short. The audiobook was only 6 hours. I also went to one of my local favorite coffee spots, and I got an iced coffee, and I drove down here to the park because it's such a nice day out. It's like 55 degrees out here, which is the warmest day that we've had in a while. Anyway, I ended up really loving this memoir a lot. Getting this prompt on the bingo board was actually really wonderful because it pushed me to actually read more nonfiction, and after reading this, it reminds me why I enjoy reading nonfiction. You know, because this book is a memoir, we're just learning about this woman Teresa's life and her experience. And the main story that she's telling is about, you know, her childhood and her upbringing and how her dad died when she was only 9 years old. And you know, she really talks about her experience with being, you know, a young Black girl who was living in a very white area and kind of how that like impacted her view of the world and impacted her life and like her idea of like who she was and how it took her like so many years to really like figure out who she was. I just really loved and really connected with the writing in this book, and I loved how she would talk about her childhood because this is something that I think about often, how like, do we really remember a lot of things from our childhood, or do we just remember the stories the way that our parents tell it? Because I love how she says, like many stories of my childhood, this one has become something of a family lore. And I think it's a really interesting thought that like we only really remember our childhoods through the eyes of our parents or like the eyes of our siblings or people who were old enough to remember those days and like tell us how we were. I also just love the way that this author talked about like relationships that she had in her life, and even the way that she would view times where she was like rejected, quote unquote, by people. When she talks about this guy that she first ever confessed her feelings to, and then he kind of like rejected her, but she says it's still a good memory and a happy memory. She's like, I think people ask me if Justin's rejection hurt because that is what they hear in the story. This is a story of triumph. It was the first time I had a big feeling about a person outside of my family, and I told them exactly how I felt. I think of it as a moment of me becoming who I am. I just really love the way that this author wrote about her like dating experiences in general and like her perspective on love and romance. I loved when she said, there was a time in my life when I believed that romantic love was guaranteed because almost everyone in her family, like everyone that she had ever known, was married and was in love and had partners, and it wasn't normal for her to see people by themselves. She says, love seemed to be a birthright and I had no reason to believe it wouldn't happen for me. And I definitely connect to that idea because, you know, when I think about my own family and like how I was growing up, it was kind of similar where like everybody had a partner, everybody had a husband or a wife or somebody in their life. And I don't think like, especially in my childhood, that I had any family members who were like single for most of their lives. I also love when memoirs do this where they include like photos of the family or like photos of moments that you were talking about like in between the parts of the book. And overall, I just really enjoyed my experience reading this. And I think this is why I like reading nonfiction so much, because I love just like getting into the head of another person and just kind of like hearing about their life experience, like how their life experiences shaped them into who they ended up becoming. I just find it all to be very fascinating, and I thought this was a really well-written memoir. I mean, it is kind of weird to like rate memoirs, like I'm fully aware of that, but I feel like this one felt like a solid 4-star for me. Anyway, as I just mentioned, I just drove down to the park, and I think I'm going to do some reading on my Kindle this afternoon because I've decided that I really really want to read The Open Era. This is the one that I'm really feeling like I need to read today. I'm just gonna chill out at the park here this afternoon and do some reading. I don't know if I'm gonna like take my blanket out there. I don't know, we're at this like weird point in Washington where it's not quite finished with winter yet, but it's not quite yet feeling like spring. And so they don't have a lot of the park benches out in the park the way that they normally do in like the summertime. So there's not as many spots to go and sit and read. I'll probably just have to sit on the grass. Hello, I just got back from the park. It's about 3:30 in the afternoon, and I have some reading updates because I am now 56% of the way through The Open Era. And I'm really surprised to be saying this, but I'm feeling a little bit like meh about this book right now. You know, I wholeheartedly went into this book today expecting to be absolutely obsessed with it, and I thought it was going to be like my new favorite thing of all time. Not only because I'm such a big fan of challengers, but because right now I'm also in my queer sports romance era. Like, I'm just seeking out the queer sports romance, and it's one of my favorite things to read. And also because this book is getting really glowing reviews already on Goodreads. I mean, granted, this book doesn't come out until June, so it only has about like 100 ratings right now on Goodreads, but it's getting like a 4.1 out of 5. It's already getting a lot of glowing 5-star reviews, so tell me why I feel like I'm not really vibing with this. And it's such a bummer too, because we started off so strong, because the opening chapter actually takes place like 10 days later. It's kind of like a flash forward, and we're getting to know this character named Austin Hardy. He's our protagonist, by the way, and it says that he is the first openly gay guy to compete in a Grand Slam tournament. So he's kind of a big deal, and we're kind of reading about this match that he has against this guy named Diego Cruz, who is like the second best in the world. And the end of the first chapter was so intriguing because it started with, they don't know Diego Cruz has hung out with me almost every day since we met. They don't know that he kissed me 2 nights ago. They don't know that he hasn't spoken to me since and that it's crushing me. And they don't know that I'm about to crush him back. Oh my gosh, I was like, sign me up. I'm so intrigued. What do you mean? And then the next chapter, we flash back to 10 days ago when they were both like arriving to this tournament and like getting things started. And so the beginning was very promising, and I felt like this book was going to have a lot of potential. I feel like the story isn't really working for me for a few different reasons. I mean, one thing is that I didn't realize that these characters would be as young as they are. Our main character, Austin, he's only 20 years old, and the love interest, Diego, he's 23 years old. But the fact that they had this scene where they like go to the bar together and Austin isn't even old enough to drink, I was like, oh wow. There are so many moments in this book where he definitely reads like he's 20 years old, at least in my opinion. I just think he's coming across a little bit like juvenile at times, and I think a lot of his humor is a little bit juvenile at times, and it's not always working for me. You know, I'm 56% of the way through the book, and not a lot has really happened between these two, and a lot of this book's focus has actually been on Austin, you know, as a character and like his mental health, because he deals a lot with anxiety, and the fact that he's like the only first openly gay player in this particular tennis tournament, it's definitely causing him even more anxiety. So we do spend so much of this book where he has these scenes with his coach, this guy named Robbie, where he's talking about maybe spending less time on his phone. He's trying to manage his anxiety better. We also do get a lot of scenes with his therapist where we get to see him talk to her about the different things that he's feeling and that he's going through. And I feel like the story's focus is a lot more on Austin's character development as opposed to the romance between him and this guy Diego. Because I hate to say it, but the romance has been pretty lackluster so far. I mean, I don't know if I'm just like setting the bar a little bit high for what I like in romance, but I don't feel like there's any tension between these two like at all. And it's like the first time they meet each other is when they're on the tennis court. They're both practicing on different sides of the court. And then Austin has this like dizzy spell where he like falls over, and Diego comes running to help him, and they have this like brief interaction. But then it's like literally this guy Diego just sliding into his Instagram DMs and putting, hey. And like the first few interactions that they have with each other, they're just so brief and they're so short, and they're just talking about like meaningless things. Like, I don't really know. I don't really feel any chemistry between them at all. I also just think some of the writing in general is just feeling a little bit young, or like it's feeling a little bit juvenile. And I know that's probably because the protagonist is only 20 years old. Like, he's a literal baby. So I don't know. I think I'm having mixed feelings because this book is not exactly what I was expecting it to be. I honestly do think at this point, calling this book a romance book does feel a little bit like a stretch. There's also also a lot of tennis in this book, and I know that that probably should not be any surprise because like, hello, the book is about a tennis, sports romance, but I just wanted to say that there's a lot of tennis in this book in terms of like on-page scenes where you're reading page after page after page of him actually practicing tennis and like during his games, who he's competing against. And I think I'm discovering as I'm reading this book that I much prefer to watch tennis as opposed to reading about it. Reading about the tennis matches over and over and over again is kind of like watching paint dry on the wall. Like I just don't really care. Like it's kind of boring to be honest. But because I love challengers so much, I was like, I'm interested in tennis all of a sudden, but this book, I'm not that interested. But anyway, it's only 3:30 in the afternoon. I think my plan is to just go ahead and finish the rest of this book. I might start skimming a little bit, not gonna lie, but I do still want to finish it. I want to give this book a fair chance. Like maybe the romance is really gonna improve in the second half. I don't know. And then later tonight, me and my mom are gonna watch the BTS documentary that just went up on Netflix today, which I am so excited to watch because I've been loving BTS's new album. Yesterday, we were catching up on all of their recent performances on like Jimmy Fallon, and they did the interviews with him, and I've missed them so much.
Yeah, I'm speeding 91, drunk driving, losing all intention, falling. Once I was living for the passion, now it's all missing without you. Yeah, I'm speeding 91, drunk driving.
Okay, hi, hello. It is many hours later. It is just after 9 o'clock at night. We did end up watching the BTS documentary, which was everything. As somebody who has a pretty big passion for songwriting, I loved seeing all the behind the scenes of the creation of this album. And I have so much respect for Namjoon. I mean, there's a reason why I'm a Namjoon and Yoongi bias, and that's because I love how passionate they are about songwriting. And I feel like that really comes across in this documentary, like how much they care and how much effort they put into the music, especially Namjoon. So the documentary was really good, and then we ended up watching 2 more episodes of season 11 of Supernatural, and season 11 of Supernatural is going so well. Like I've had so many episodes that I've given 10 out of 10. I mean, last night we ended up watching that episode of Supernatural called Just My Imagination, and I loved that one. And then tonight we ended up watching this one called Into the Mystic, and that was another one that I gave 10 out of 10. Like I really, really loved it. I feel like season 11 of Supernatural is like one of the better seasons of this show because I feel like for the first time in season 11, it's like going back to the roots of Supernatural, where like every episode is a different case and it's more about like ghost hunting again, and I just miss that so much. So season 11 has been absolutely fantastic. I'm really having a fun time with it. And I wanted to update you that I did finish reading The Open Era, and I am so disappointed to tell you that I just didn't love this one. I think I'm probably gonna give this book like 2.5 stars. I don't know, it was fine. And you know what really sucks is that I think I'm gonna have an unpopular opinion when it comes to this book because it does seem like this book is being pretty well received so far. I do think part of it might be that I went into the book with the wrong expectations, but when they're marketing this book as a sports queer romance, I don't know what I'm supposed to think because the romance in this book really took a backseat, especially in the second half of this book, where I would have expected the romance to develop even more. There was also a really annoying nickname, if I might add. I mean, I'm just not the biggest fan of annoying nicknames, and I feel like this book had a nickname that started to get on my nerves. I just think the romance in this book felt so juvenile and like so underdeveloped. I just wanted so much more out of this romance. I think these characters were so obsessed with like trying to impress each other that sometimes they wouldn't be honest about things, and I just think that really bothers me. It reminds me of like how people are when they're in high school, when they're just like trying to impress their crush, and I couldn't get past how young this character felt, especially Austin. Like there was a moment in the book where he mentioned that he was 10 years old when the song Drag Me Down by One Direction came out, and I think my soul just like left my body when he said that. I was like, what do you mean? Obviously when I'm reading a sports romance, I'm expecting the sport to be like a pretty big part of the story, but I feel like this story was more focused on the sport than it was on the actual romance. And I actually think the best thing about this book was probably the representation of anxiety. And he's really learning a lot throughout this book about how to manage his anxiety, how to understand the triggers, how to like see those things in himself. And I do think that the mental health stuff was written very well in this book. Like it all felt very realistic to me. And I appreciated the conversation about, like mental health in athletes and like how important that is to take care of your mental health. A lot of this story is about this character Austin as he's really like working through a lot of these tough feelings and having a lot of thoughts about how he might be too broken to fix. And I think that's something a lot of people can probably relate to. And so I did enjoy the representation with that, and I think there was a lot of important discussions about mental health. But at least in my opinion, this reads so much more like a literary fiction style of book with this character Austin. It's definitely more of a character study as opposed to a romance. The more that I think about it, I actually think getting Diego's perspective in this book actually would have helped a lot, because then I feel like it would have felt more like a romance when you're hearing from both sides. Since we never get Diego's perspective in this book, it was really hard to know what he was feeling in like any given scene, and like maybe that's the point, but I just feel like we spend so much time in Austen's head in this novel that it actually would have been really nice to have the balance of dual point of views. Another thing that I loved that I thought I would mention was all of the Gilmore Girls references. They bring up that show quite a bit, and you know, as a big Gilmore Girls fan, I can appreciate that. Otherwise, this just really wasn't for me, and I'm so devastated, you have no idea. The only reason I even requested this book on NetGalley was because I was so positive it was going to be a new all-time favorite of mine, and I think with this book and the premise that it had so much potential to be a new favorite, and I think that's what hurts the most when a book like this is so disappointing. Hello, it is now the next afternoon and I have a reading update because I just read the entirety of Before the Coffee Gets Cold. I was able to get the audiobook checked out from my library, and the audiobook was only 7 hours long, so it was a really quick one. You know, this book first published in 2019, and I've been hearing such incredible things about not only this book, but this book series for years now. And so I'm really glad that I finally got around to reading this one for this video, because this book especially, oh my gosh, like it's right up my alley with what I like in books, because this story is taking place in this tiny little cafe in Tokyo. And it says, local legends say that this shop offers something else besides coffee, the chance to travel back in time. I absolutely love books like this that kind of explore anything like time travel or some kind of alternate reality, or like if you made a different choice, what would your life look like? That is one of my absolute favorite things to read ever. And so this book was really fascinating concept-wise, because you're following 4 different stories about people who are traveling back in time to visit loved ones. The first story that you read is about these 2 people who are lovers, and then the second story is about this married couple, and then the third story is about these 2 sisters, and then the final story is about this mother and her child. So I liked how all of the 4 stories were very different and unique from each other. There were a lot of different rules about how this time travel was able to work. Like one of the rules says, don't expect the present to change no matter what you change in the past. The second rule is that there's only one seat that allows you to time travel, and you must sit in it the entire time that you're visiting. Third rule is that you only have the time that it takes before your coffee turns cold, and if you're not back by then, you get stuck at the cafe as a ghost. And the fourth rule is that you can only go one time. So concept-wise, this was absolutely fascinating, and it's one of those books that like really makes you think about your life, and you only have such a brief period of time that you're able to go back in time because you have to get back before the coffee gets cold. I think my favorite story out of the 4 stories in this collection had to be the first one, and I don't know if that's because it was setting it up in the most intriguing way, but like learning about the time travel and learning about how it works in this cafe was like so interesting to me, and I was really loving the first short story. Then I didn't love the last 2 stories as much, and especially that final story about the mother and the child. Like absolutely not. I was not here for that one. I just didn't really personally agree with like the message and like what was happening in that final story. It just felt a little bit forced. And so I do have some mixed feelings on this, because I can definitely see how people would say that this is like a really emotional book, because I do think that this book touches on some really, you know, sensitive topics like pregnancy and even like Alzheimer's and just like mental illness in general. But I don't know if it was because of the writing itself, but like I never really felt too attached to any of these characters emotionally. I was more invested in the time travel itself than like the reason why these characters were time traveling, I guess. But it was starting to feel repetitive with like the way that the time travel works in each one of the stories. And I guess I was just losing interest a little bit as the book continued on. I'm actually so curious, you know, because this is the first book in a series that's like a really popular book series. And I do wonder if every book in this series, like, does it take place in the same cafe and we just follow like different characters who are visiting this cafe, or is it like a completely different story? Because after reading this first one, I definitely understand the hype with this series, and I understand why a lot of people are really connecting with this and why it's as popular as it is. I just don't know if it had that same emotional impact on me that I was expecting it to have. I'm probably going to end up giving this one around 3.5 stars, and I don't really know if I'm going to continue on in this book series, but I am so glad that I read this book, because this one is very thought-provoking and it's so up my alley in that way. This is the kind of story that I would want to write myself. The concept in this is just so fascinating. I'm going to be getting ready to leave here soon, because I'm actually going to be going and seeing Project Hail Mary in theaters again, because this time I'm going to be taking my parents to see it, and they haven't seen it yet. My sister Rachel's going to come with us as well, and I can't wait to see this movie again. Okay, hello, I am checking in with a reading update because it is now the next afternoon. Yesterday, I did end up going and seeing Project Hail Mary with my whole family, and it was so much fun, and we all really loved it. I mean, I love Project Hail Mary so much that I actually added it to my Letterboxd top 4 movies. That's how much I love this movie and how much I'm obsessing over it. Like, I actually had to add it to my Letterboxd top 4, which is saying a lot because I haven't updated my Letterboxd like that in years. But this movie just really does something for me. It's absolutely everything. Like, I just love it so much. And this morning, I've been doing some reading sprints on my Patreon, and I've started reading Come Knocking, and this book has been such a wild reading experience. I think if you're familiar with the book Fantastic Land by this author, then I think you would kind of know what to expect going into this one, because this one actually does remind me quite a bit of Fantastic Land so far, because you're following the same guy who's like the private investigator from Fantastic Land, so this is kind of like his second book. The investigator's name is Adam Jakes. I was taking some notes in my notebook while I was reading this because I didn't want to have my phone on me to like distract me, so instead of taking notes on my phone like I usually do, I was just taking notes in this little notepad. So basically the idea of Come Knocking is that it's an interactive theater experience. They were talking about how they had this theater experience in New York for like 3 or 5 years before they ended up moving it to LA, and they've been having the show in LA for the last 3 years before this really insane massacre happened on March 14th in Los Angeles, where 56 people died, and it was like one of the most grotesque and like awful things to happen in American history. And so this book is kind of telling you what happened on that night and like what led up to that event. And like Fantastic Land, it's all done through interviews, so you're just hearing from different people who were there the night that it happened, or you're reading about like different Reddit posts for people that were talking about what happened, and you hear from all kinds of people who were working at the event. Like, you hear from some of the bartenders, you hear from the dancers, you hear from the security guard and like different cast members, and even people who just went as fans. And the way that this theater experience is described is like a little bit hard to visualize because it says that it takes up 6 floors of space, and so it's basically in a 6-story building, and you can go to different floors to have different experiences. It says that each one of the floors is a designed space that mashes together theater, dance, and special effects in a gory, unspeakable spectacle. You put on this mask so that you blend in with the crowd and like nobody knows who you are. And they say that this event starts at 7 o'clock at night and it goes through 10 o'clock at night, and basically the show kind of repeats itself at the end of every hour. So they said you should go early to get the most out of the experience, because every time you go to a different floor, there's different stories happening. And this is the type of event where like you have to go back to the event over and over and over again to understand the full story. And it's the type of thing where like a lot of people are doing these like Reddit deep dives to try and like further understand what the story is. This interactive experience sounds really cool, and it actually kind of reminds me of that place called Area 15 that I went to in Las Vegas, because there's this place in Area 15 that's called Omega Mart, and it is kind of similar to this concept where like all of the employees in this Mega Mart are like cast members, and they're all kind of like putting on this show, and it's very interactive because you can walk through it and you can like engage with certain things. But this one, this Come Knocking experience, sounds like it's way more creepy because this one is a lot more horror themed. I mean, you have these people who are like demon dancers, and there's lots of blood, and they interact with the audience in a way that's really creepy, and there's a lot of nudity. And in fact, we actually had a whole chapter in this book that was dedicated to this Reddit post that was talking about how you can see the most nudity while you're there. There's lots of nudity happening at this event, and it's also the type of event where like the dancers can interact with you directly. Like, they have the right to touch you. I mean, if this type of event actually existed in real life, like I would definitely not want to go, but it is really interesting to read about. And I'm just now getting to the part in the book where I'm actually reading about the interviews for like what actually happened on the night of March 14th. And like, God, it is so terrifying. I was kind of laughing in one of the earlier chapters because with one of the interviews they had, this guy was saying that it struck him as pretentious and not very practical. And I was laughing because that's exactly what I was thinking. There's something about the way that the people talk about this experience that does feel a little bit pretentious, because they make it sound like it's one of those things that you could never possibly understand unless you were there yourself. But I'm just pushing past that because I am so invested right now in what I'm reading and like what ended up happening this night. And I think the overall tone of this book is actually pretty depressing, you know, because this story is talking a lot about how like, how could violence like this ever have happened, and trying to understand people and like why we feel as much rage as we do. And this book is talking a lot about how like climate change has really like impacted the world and impacted our lives, and how like healthcare in America has like absolutely failed us, and like our government doesn't care about us, nobody cares about us, and people are feeling a lot of rage because of those things, which I think is very true, and a lot of people could really relate to that feeling. And I think that's the scariest part about this type of story and why it reminds me a lot of Fantastic Land, because it's that reminder that like sometimes people don't really need a reason to behave violently. You know, like sometimes people are just violent for the sake of violence, and I think that's one of the most scariest things that I could ever imagine. So I am really enjoying this book a lot so far. Like at the beginning, I wasn't too sure because it was feeling a little bit pretentious and like I just wasn't really vibing with it at the start. But now that I'm 118 pages into it, I think I'm almost at the halfway point and I'm just really loving it. Like, I'm way more invested now. Okay, hello, it's been a few hours. It's just after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but I have an update because I just finished reading Come Knocking, and honestly, I'm kind of like overwhelmed with this book. I think I'm probably gonna give this one 4 stars because I don't think I loved this one quite as much as I loved Fantastic Land, but this book definitely gave me a lot of the same feelings that I had while I was reading Fantastic Land, and I do think that if you enjoyed that book, you'll probably like this one too. But this book was actually kind of depressing to read today because I feel like this book just really shows you like the worst sides of humanity, and it really just gives you that feeling of helplessness, you know, as you're reading from all these different perspectives of these people who experienced this really awful massacre. I do see some people on Goodreads saying that the second half of this book does get a little bit repetitive because you are reading about a lot of situations over and over again where these people are describing like absolutely horrifying things that were happening to them. Because during this massacre, there were a lot of really horrific things happening, not just like people getting shot and like the whole building was on fire, you know, like people were like burning alive. And I think there were so many scenes in this book that had me feeling so incredibly like claustrophobic and were almost like making me anxious just to read. So I think the writing in this book was done incredibly well. You know, I think this author does such an incredible job with capturing how scary that would feel, to feel like you're maybe stuck in a crowd where everybody is panicking and it feels kind of like a life or death situation and you're trying to understand like what's going on. And especially in a place like this where like Come Knocking is supposed to be, you know, kind of a scary interactive experience. So you're constantly wondering like, is this part of the show or is there like actually an emergency happening? Like you can't tell because there's a lot of horrifying things that are already included in the interactive experience. And honestly, like that kind of sounds like my worst nightmare, like not really knowing if a situation is real or not and if you're actually in danger or if it's all part of the show. Like that adds to the creepiness for me. There were so many horrifying scenes in the second half of this book that are really gonna stick with me, and especially like the last chapter of this book just packed such a punch. And I feel like this author has a lot to say about like the violent nature of humanity. And you know, like I was talking about earlier, how like one of the scariest thoughts is the idea that humans can just be violent for no real reason, or how this anger, this rage can just be slowly building in a person over time until it gets to a point like this. I did appreciate how this book had so many different interviews with so many people, like some that I didn't even think we would get. And then you do read from the perspective of some people who were really awful and were like instigating a lot of the violence in this book and how they didn't really feel any remorse about it either. And that was also really tough to read. Like I'm just telling you, this book was pretty bleak. It was pretty upsetting to read this afternoon, but I think I have to give this 4 stars because I was so invested in this situation, in this massacre, and I just kept flipping the pages because I could not put it down. Like I just had to know where the story was going, and I thought all of it was really interesting and really well written in the sense that I felt so anxious while I was reading this afternoon. So yeah, I'm giving this one 4 stars. I'll be thinking about this book for a long time. It's so wild to me that this book only has about like 300 ratings on Goodreads right now, so it doesn't seem like it has a very big readership, which is wild to me because I thought Fantastic Land was pretty popular if I do recall. And so I would definitely be curious to see how more people are feeling about this one because it's getting pretty decent reviews on Goodreads from what I've seen. And this is definitely the kind of book that would spark a lot of conversation. But anyway, I only have one more book to read for this video, and that is We Could Be So Good by Cat Sebastian. I am so excited to read this. You have no idea. This is a 5-star prediction of mine after how much I loved Starshipped, so I'm hoping that I love this one as much as I'm expecting to. And then tomorrow, I'm thinking about maybe driving down to Bellingham and like getting an acai bowl in the morning. I feel like that sounds like the perfect way to start my day.
I was a rebel without a cause, living out of the blue. Used to think I knew it all, but didn't have a clue. And love was just a game, wore my heart on my sleeve. Nothing scared me anyway, nothing could ever break me. Now I'm falling down, thought I'd have it figured out by now.
Hello, good afternoon. It is now almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm trying a different angle in my car this morning because the sun is kind of coming in at a weird glare when I tried to set it up like right in front of me like I usually do. So hopefully you don't mind. I'm sorry that my steering wheel is like right in the way. But anyway, I have a reading update because this morning I have started reading We Could Be So Good by Cat Sebastian, and I just got 140 pages in. I'm now on chapter 9, and holy shit, Cat Sebastian is doing it for me again. And this book feels really similar to Starshipped in some ways. series. I mean, the plot itself is actually very different, and I jumped into this book without even knowing what it was about. Something that I didn't realize is that this one is actually a historical fiction. This book is taking place mostly in like 1958, and we're following these two guys named Nick and Andy, and they're both living in New York, and they're both working for this newspaper, which I think is so cute and so fun because I love reading about newspaper jobs. And because I'm not a big historical fiction reader, I was a little bit nervous about that, but I'm starting to realize that maybe when it comes to like queer historical romance, like that could be right up my alley. I'm already loving these characters so much. I just got to this chapter at the end of part 2 and like I had tears in my eyes because I thought they were so cute, and I'm getting like some of the same feelings that I had while I was reading Starshipped. There's just something about the way that Cat Sebastian writes her characters, dude. Like I don't know what it is, it just really works for me. And there's a lot about Nick and Andy's characters in this book that do remind me a lot of the characters from Starshipped. I mean, I just love the writing in this book so much. Like listen to this first sentence when it says Nick Russo could fill the Sunday paper with reasons why he shouldn't be able to stand Andy Fleming. He blushes approximately 500 times a day. He has a cluster of tiny freckles at the corner of his mouth shaped like a copy editor's carrot, and Nick can't stop looking at them. Those freckles are gonna ruin his career. Like bro, right from the jump, I was like, okay, I'm obsessed with them. They're so cute. And I actually love the fact that even though this book feels like it has all of the potential for like a hate to love kind of a situation, I actually love that almost from the beginning of this book, these two are best friends. And I love the fact that Nick's character is like pretty openly queer. I mean, he's not out at work obviously because this is like 1958 we're talking about, but like he's a lot more comfortable in his sexuality and he knows what he wants, whereas Andy's the type of character who's like starting to figure out that he might be queer, which I also do love, the gay for you trope. When a character starts to realize that maybe they could be queer and they never even like saw that in themselves until they met somebody specific. I love that trope so much. We're also getting like a really good roommates to lovers kind of a situation happening, which I also just love that trope so much. I think the only like teeny tiny complaint that I have with the audiobook for this one so far is that we do get to read from Nick and Andy's perspectives in this book, so we kind of go back and forth, but the narrator is all done by one guy on the audiobook, so I think it can get a little bit confusing sometimes, like which character is which, just because they don't have distinctive voices on the audiobook. And I feel like I do have a little bit of like a love-hate relationship with this audiobook because sometimes I think the narrator of the audiobook is like so funny and his comedic timing for some of these scenes is really good. Then at other times I find his narration style to be like a little bit like over the top and like a little bit annoying sometimes. So I'm not obsessed with the audiobook, and it's wild because this is actually the same guy who did the audiobook for Starshipped. I don't think he's my favorite audiobook narrator that I've ever listened to, but I'm trying not to let that impact how I view this story because this absolutely feels like it's going to be a 5-star. Like I love this. I genuinely think that this author is like raising the bar for what I'm going to be expecting from romance novels from this point forward. So this one is going very well, like even better than I was expecting, and I was already expecting great things. Like at this point, I would be really shocked if this book was not 5 stars. But anyway, like I mentioned, it's almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I think since I'm in the area, I might actually swing by my local mochi nut. I don't actually know what the flavors are this week, so like I have no idea which donuts could be there. I also do love getting their boba tea when I go to Mochi Nut because they have this latte that's boba tea that I really love to get when I'm there, so I think I'm gonna get one of those. It's actually so wild when I'm like listening to an audiobook for a book that I'm really loving while I'm driving because I'm trying to like absorb everything in my head, and then as soon as I park my car again, I'm like going back in the book and annotating it like crazy, and that's how you know the book is good. Hello, it is so many hours later. It is just after 4 o'clock. I just got back from going on a walk, and I did end up going to Mochi Nut earlier today, and they had a few different flavors of donuts that I was really excited about. I mean, they didn't have my favorite flavor there. I think they only have that flavor like very sporadically, but I just finished reading We Could Be So Good, and this is definitely one of those situations where it's like, did I just finish the book or did it just finish me? Because what the fuck, this was so cute. Oh my god, you know, like I was saying earlier, Cat Sebastian is just raising the fucking bar for romance, okay? This was god tier in every way possible. And I have to give this 5 stars. I mean, did I enjoy this book as much as I enjoyed Starshipped? Probably not, but this is still without a doubt 5 stars for me, especially compared to like a lot of the other romance that I've been reading recently. Like this was so good. And I am kind of surprised by how much I enjoyed this because, you know, like I mentioned, I'm not the biggest fan of like historical fiction, but I feel like there is something about this particular time period that makes the romance feel a little bit more forbidden than it would in like a present day setting. And I just loved these characters so much. I mean, much like Starshipped, I feel like both of these characters are just very wholesome, very sweet, and they have the best banter and like the best sexual tension between them. Like, are you freaking kidding me? I actually annotated the crap out of this book that I like almost ran out of blue tabs again, which is exactly what happened to me when I read the last book from this author. There was a moment while I was listening to this audiobook today while I was driving home and I had like tears in my eyes as I was driving just because of how cute they were, which like that doesn't happen to me. I don't usually get teary-eyed just because the scene is so cute. These two made me want to cry so many times just because they were so adorable. I also just really appreciate how realistic these characters felt. Not only that, but like the smut scenes in this book were so well written. Cat Sebastian understands me. The tension between them leading up to those scenes, oh my god, it was everything. And all I'm saying is that chapter 20 is gonna be burned into my mind for eternity. I read that chapter once and then I read it again, and I'll probably be returning to that chapter very often because of how much I loved it. I was actually really surprised by how much of a slow burn this book is. I mean, it's nearly 400 pages, but I actually loved that about this because it made the relationship feel even more real. I also just loved reading about their jobs in this book too, because I love the fact that they were both working at this newspaper. I love the fact that Andy is like the boss's son, you know, and he's supposed to be the one that's like going to be coming up. His dad's going to be retiring soon, but he really doesn't want to take over this newspaper company. He doesn't feel like it's for him. And so I really did love seeing Andy grow so much as a character throughout the book. It's so crazy to me too, because there have been so many people on my Patreon over the years telling me that I need to read Cat Sebastian, and like, why did I wait this long? I should have listened to you sooner. Like, you were absolutely correct that this is exactly what I love in a queer romance. Like, are you kidding me? And it's actually so crazy because when I look at the front page, there are so many books that this author has published. I do see that some of the romances that she's published in the past have been like Regency romances, so those are like very, very historical, I would imagine. A lot of her previous stuff is probably taking place in like the 1800s, so like I don't really know if that would be my thing, but I do know that this book also has a sequel, I think, or at least a romance that takes place in the same universe, and I think it takes place in the same time period, so I definitely want to read the next book in this series. And I think because this author has been 2 for 2 for me so far, like 2 5-star books back to back, I'm definitely more than willing to give any of her backlist books a shot, because you never know, they might end up being my new favorite thing ever. So that is going to be a wrap on this reading vlog. I'm actually so excited and so thrilled with how well this reading vlog went for the most part, especially because I finally got to read this book that has been on my TBR for a while, and I also really enjoyed Come Knocking. I've been thinking about that book nonstop since I read it yesterday, but I would love to know if you've read any of these books. Let me know your thoughts, and thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you soon with another video. Bye!